friends. My name is Stephanie Romero, and I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. I want to welcome you to our podcast, The Ripple Effect. Awaken Pittsburgh is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering well-being, empathy, and compassion for all by teaching and encouraging mindfulness and meditation practices. I also want to take a moment to let you know that Awaken Pittsburgh offers many other opportunities for practice and connection. For example, you can join our online community, which features a space to more deeply explore the topics we cover with our guests. We have weekly posts to spark thought, practice, and reflection. I hope you will come join us to explore, connect with others, and deepen your practice. You can find out more at awakenpittsburgh.org. I am really happy to have Shawn Meredith today as my guest on the Ripple Effect podcast. Shawn happens to be Awaken Pittsburgh's board president. In addition, Shawn is the owner of Skillful Leadership, an executive coaching firm that specializes in the human factors of leadership and teaming. He coaches globally and has served clients on every continent but Antarctica. Shawn has been a professional coach since 2013 after leaving a 15-year career in community mental health, serving all of Allegheny County. In that career, he started as an ecosystemic family therapist and in time was promoted to an executive member of the leadership team. Shawn started his exploration of mindfulness in 2001 while working on his senior dissertation, Cognitive Dissonance in Politically Active Sri Lankan Buddhist Monks. Since then, he continues to pursue mindfulness both experientially and academically in the spirit of better helping those he coaches. He is a self-described human biologist who often tells his clients that mindfulness is the cardio of the brain, which is essential for growth. Shawn currently resides in the South Hills of Pittsburgh with his wife and 2 children. Shawn, I am excited to get to know you in a deeper way through this podcast. I find that these interviews help me get to know folks in a way that I don't usually. And I'm excited to have that conversation with you, and thank you for joining.
Yeah, the same. Absolutely. I love the subject and the work. So let's explore.
So one thing that I really wanted to reflect on with you is how your work supporting leaders of organizations integrates mindfulness and empathy both into it. And so I'm curious first to know your personal path in mindfulness, and then maybe how you integrate it both into your personal and professional life.
Perfect. So I guess I'll start with a personal path. I started mindfulness was a thing that I think for a lot of folks my age started getting seeded into conversations. So as early as probably undergrad, I think concepts of mindfulness and yoga and what people I think at the time would loosely just say Eastern philosophy started entering a lot of the conversation. So I was always curious about it. I'm a very curious person. I went to a liberal arts school where there was some uh, influence, some of this stuff going on, and so I kind of early on got interested in the subject just by happenstance. It was just in the ecosystem that I was in. So I then went into a career in therapy. So I was a family therapist for about 15 years, but at the time I was doing family therapy in homes, working with families that were at risk of having children separated from them or already had. We were working on foster care and adoption and family reunification. And naturally, when you went into that field, there was a lot of work on self-awareness, self-discovery, thinking about how people were thinking, thinking about how people were processing their world, and you really had to work with that, especially when you're in these big complex family systems, to get out of your worldview into these other worldviews. So I think organically, as I was practicing that skill of getting into the shoes, as to speak, of these families. Again, sort of mindfulness would come up at times. I don't think at the time people would really talk about it that way. They would maybe say there was like a mindfulness workshop, but there was certainly a lot of exploring of one's mind, how it functions, how it works, how it goes. And Concurrently, I think I had my own existential crisis at 23, where I went and got a existential philosophy degree because that's what you do with existential crises, apparently, and um, and it was a philosophy of psychology degree. So it was looking a lot, and existential philosophy was a lot about what is consciousness, what is thinking, what is the human condition. So again, there was just a lot of these kind of synergy between these different areas I was working in, which just led me more and more into this idea of thinking about one's thinking, thinking about one's feeling, thinking about one's senses. And then to fast forward a lot of that, maybe we'll get into more of that if we want. When I moved into executive coaching, one of the advantages I had was that I was not an executive coach who came from a big executive background. I wasn't an executive coach who came, executive coaches kind of come out of executive suites, HR departments, or kind of my path, which is more of a psychology path. And I found that a lot of my clients, I just had to keep setting this foundation of awareness of the inner climate. I had to keep setting this foundation of there's stuff going on in your head, and we need to be aware of what's going on in your head. And so I think it guides it. Some clients are more willing to engage that word mindfulness and engage that practice a little more formally. Some clients I find are maybe a little allergic to that word, but they still need that foundational skill of I got to be able to think about my thinking to be able to perform in my job. I have to think about my feeling, and I have to understand this internal world a little more to be skillful in my job. So that's really kind of a quick sketch of how I came to it and how I use it.
Yeah, I'm curious, like in the nitty-gritty, like what does your personal practice look like?
Um, well, very messy. So very messy. I think my personal practice is a combination of some formal meditation. So I do have my sometimes I tell my clients that mindfulness is the yeah, meditation is the cardio of the mind. So I have my treadmill, which is my meditation area in my room. And I have that set up. I'm good with that at times and bad with that at times. I think it's like physical fitness. It's just a thing you kind of have good spurts on and fall out of and have to get back into. Conversations like these help help remind me of it. And I pursue it also very academically. It's just kind of how I'm built. So I also engage in a lot of um, research, but also probably more. I'm more of a application over theory guy. So just engaging in a lot of the application of it, the understanding of it, the framing of it. I think it's this thing that um, thinking about psychology and the mind and the functioning of the mind, which to me is really the core of meditation. It's just observing one's mind. That for me, that really is this thing that we sort of need to always be outsmarting our cognitive frameworks and language. So, I found right around COVID, I found this obscure podcast from a Zen monastery in New York, upstate New York, called Zen Mountain Monastery. And the Zen folks talk a lot about language and framework, and they have the koan structure of sort of out duping the mind's tendency to think it knows everything. So that really resonated with me as well, probably as more of a philosophical mind, more of a thinking mind. I find their model of kind of short circuiting your thinking for more spontaneous moments of awareness is really useful for me.
Yeah, I love a good koan.
I literally
Right.
have cards that I sit at my desk that I could shuffle through, and they just
Uh,
give you a nice little koan. And
that's
so the
awesome.
randomness of it really challenges you
Yeah.
to embrace it.
Yeah, yeah, there's a whole the whole idea that our fundamental nature doesn't have that overlay of interpretation that the cognitive mind is constantly engaged in, right? That our natural state, which is what you, depending on your tradition, are hoping to access through meditation, right? That natural state doesn't have that overlay. And so yeah, the Zen techniques of koan and other things to stop the mind, to get yourself out of that I understand everything mode, right? Is really interesting
Yeah.
to me as well. Um, I think I once heard a Tibetan teacher say it also happens when you yawn.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Because it
Yep.
just stops. There's nothing there for a second, right?
Yep. Yep. That's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I thought you would like that. Yeah, so I really like that. That is something to work with for folks. And then I want to just come back to the conversation we were having or what you were saying about your work before with families because I really see, we work with families that are in difficult situations all the time. And I was also a foster mom, so I also work with a lot of kiddos that were experiencing family separation.
Yeah.
Um, And so, yeah, I guess how did you at that time hold all that pain? How did you work with it to maintain empathy? Because a lot of times, folks that are in those roles over a long period of time can get detached from the pain of it, can get detached from the actual suffering, can experience compassion fatigue. So I'm just curious how you worked with that.
That's that's a that's a wonderful question, and it's a longer answer than probably we can get to fully today. But the tip of the iceberg for me is that um, one of the things that helped with our service is we were so immersed into the client's world. So we worked in living rooms, usually below the poverty line, and not only was I a therapist for a while, but I trained therapists after that. And then I ran a lot of our programs, and we when you were as immersed in it as you were, if you could keep your mindful aperture open, if you could keep your focus open, and you could see the whole system, it just it included everything, including the reasons that people were stuck, including the reasons that this stuff was perpetuating. And I think that was really important because the the model that most of us work under is that the good guys and bad guys, the villains and the heroes, and I find that most people when they come to these systems, consciously or unconsciously, they know they're fighting for the heroes, and they unskillfully look for a villain out there. And empathy is very hard for folks because it's unsafe. Empathy is unsafe because you become part of it, and those clear black and white lines, those clear kind of white hat, black hat lines dissolve very, very quickly. And I find that if you really, I had to work on unifying families that had experienced a lot of abuse and unifying families. And the interesting thing that really challenged people is the data showed us that children thrive in their birth homes even if those birth homes are worse on a couple stats, if they're maybe not as wealthy or have as many resources, or even if those birth homes are a little um, sharp with discipline and environment, that children will do better with their people. They'll do better with their family. They're connected. And that's not saying that foster care and adoption is not a good thing. It's very necessary. But reunification had to happen, and to do that, you really had to connect deeply with this group of humans. And most of the time, you found that everybody really was trying their best. Even the people committing the abuse, or the people committing the situations. I had an amazing trainer who used to talk to us about good mission, bad method. He said everyone in you will always find a good mission under everybody's behavior. What you can critique is the method. And I found once I could deeply connect with people's mission, they were open to hearing other methods. Most people, even physically abusing their kids, believe it or not, this is going to be controversial, and maybe some of our listeners will struggle with this, but their mission was for their children to thrive. Their mission was for, it's so easy for us to just picture there's just people who wake up and like, I just want to do bad today. I just want to do evil. I just want to put crap into the world. And that's really not the case. Most people are doing the best they can with the resources and the information available to them, but it's so hard to get there. So to answer your question more specifically, I think that the idea of this is going to sound a little out there, but the idea of me being able to show up as a neutral event myself, not really bringing a lot of my ego or baggage or my own thoughts and opinions. And again, this is a big topic. We're just touching the tip of the iceberg here, but me really being able to show up as just a aperture of loving kindness. Man, people responded to that.
Yeah, we all just want to feel that, right?
Yeah. And when you could hold that space, even in difficult situations, and I was in the mix of a lot of very, very dangerous situations. And you got to take that risk. That's what I mean when I say empathy is a risk. You got to take that risk to really be with people. If not, you're kind of on the sidelines, just um, observing or critiquing, or not even observing. But yeah, I don't know how to describe that well, but you had to get in it
Yeah,
and
yeah.
open.
Yeah, there's a it's making me remember I was in a training with David Trelevin who talks about trauma sensitive mindfulness. He teaches on that a lot. Um, and somebody in the chat said they were over empathetic, like it was too much for them. It felt overwhelming, right? And I think that's what you're kind of pointing to, is that it can overwhelm us because there is so much pain and suffering, especially in situations like the ones you're describing. And he suggested that you do a visualization where you have a volume dial, right? And that
Yeah,
when it feels overwhelming, to just dial it back a little. And when it feels like you're not connecting, to try to imagine yourself dialing it up, that we can actually kind of work on opening, or I don't want to say closing because it's not a complete closure, but like protecting ourselves,
yeah,
that we have to do that too.
yeah. I mean, it was always safety first. I mean, I wouldn't go into, I worked in crisis mental health, chronically mentally ill family systems, and sure, there was safety first. In fact, quite honestly, I've gotten critiqued at times for not being safety conscious for myself, and quite honestly for others, and I had to work with that because, I really wanted to be so close to the friction point. Um, we were usually the folks who showed up after the first responders. So once the crisis situation was handled, we went in for the families for the long-term change. And I think when you just mentioned the knob, maybe a framework I like, and um, there's a lot of versions of it, but it's covered pretty well in the Untethered Soul book. And he talks about in that book about how we kind of have an opening in the front and an opening in the back, and that, do we let stuff in, but then also do we let stuff through, and I think that letting through, I don't see people talk about that part of it enough. That the aperture, or the knob, as you said, lets you. I have an art minor too, so I talk about aperture, like camera aperture, like how much you open in that aperture. And but there's another end that I think when I really had to help my therapist realize, and even now some of my executive clients, that at the end of the day, this is only so much about you. That you're just kind of a passenger on this thing, and you do what you can, and then you go home. And that letting things all the way through you. There's meditations on like a stream or a river, and you just let the objects float past. You don't dam it up. You don't get them stuck. That There was a real skillfulness when it came to compassion fatigue, because compassion fatigue was holding on. It was holding on to the things that broke your heart. It was holding on to the things that you wish went differently. It was holding on to things that scared you. And so I think skillful helpers um, really let that through. And honestly, sometimes people will critique those helpers as being insensitive or being brash. But you see, there's sort of in all intensity helpers, you'll find that when their guards down, they really do have a sometimes a real trench frontline sense of humor. They'll make certain jokes, and you hear this in ER rooms and nursing rooms and first responders and therapists because they're allowed to let the stuff through that at times can seem dangerous because other people might call you insensitive. But like, hey, I got to keep moving here. We got more work to do. Um, and if I get stuck, I'm useless to anybody.
Yeah, that's real. My mom was a I can't remember, level 5 trauma ER nurse for 30 years, so I
Yeah.
grew up with stories and comments and things where I'm like, "Mom," you know, but it's the processing of it.
Yep.
It's the letting it out, It is. It really, really is. Well, maybe that's a great segue for us into if you actually, I'm just very curious, if you actually incorporate any kind of meditation or mindfulness practice today in your leadership coaching, do you actually guide any practices? So how do you incorporate it? What do you think the role is?
Great question. So in my private practice, no, in the sense of I'm not doing guided practice. I will not I'm not selling that, and I don't know. I I do it? Yes, 24/7. There's a great quote in one of the John Kabat-Zinn books where he said, "When I was a Buddhist, no one in my family could stand me. When I was the Buddha, no one seemed to mind." And you could replace that for Christ or Muhammad or any other framework. And so I really try to just live it. And I know that might sound a little um, maybe even pretentious, but I think I show up in a way that is encouraging that, and you may know better than me. I think there's words for that, but sort of that just aura of mindfulness. So I'm asking questions. I'm using things, pattern interrupts. I'm using systems to get people mindfulness. And you see that in a lot of older traditions, that a lot of times the teacher's job was to just, they didn't say, I'm going to start a 10-minute meditation now and let's ring the bell. And there's a place for all of that. But I kind of like to say, I like to do the what happens when you leave the cushion. How do you bring this off the cushion into the world? So I found that there's just a certain way to ask. There's a certain thing, and again, sometimes the Zen folks talk about pointers. So the masters in those traditions were always just kind of doing this weird stuff that sometimes just sounds so zany, but I think they were living it a little bit more than practicing it. Now, behind all that, there is the practice. You need that foundational practice. So at most, I'll often suggest to clients that if they have an interest, they find a practice that works for them to build that core fitness. But my work's a little bit once we're on the playing field. Um, so places like Awaken are amazing for building that core fitness, but that's not necessarily what I sell or do, I guess. Sell's a bit of a weird word.
Yeah, but I think part of what you're saying actually matches what we know about co-regulation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's your presence is what you're bringing. So someone maybe is freaking out on a call with you, stressing, complaining, whatever they're doing, and you are just bringing, like, we don't need to react like that. This is actually a different way of being.
Yeah. It's a great observation because when I train leaders, sometimes I'll say, picture, a river, a really raging river, lots of chaos, lots of rapid. Now take a rock and put it in there. What happens? I'll take a bigger rock. I'll take a bigger rock. And eventually, if you put a big enough rock, it calms down the river, um, or the waves. You can have a wave breaker. So I think that anxiety that we all live in 24/7, the actual human existence of this anxiety, um, we need folks that can be those dampers. And yeah, that affects folks in the room. And then what I find is people will then kind of get curious and they'll say, how do you do that? How'd you pull that off? And um, that's when I'll introduce them to more resources to build the fitness around that. But but not directly, because I personally, and I know this is a little bit of tension, when Awaken is working with folks, they've come in expecting that experience. I think sometimes there's a bit of a ad hoc, unsolicited idea, and this might be again another controversial thing, but when I come into a training or a lecture or a conference, and people say we're going to do a mindful moment. Well, I haven't really consented to that. Maybe I'm not ready for that. Maybe that's not the practice I want to do right now. And I think a lot of times for people, then it becomes forced. It's like, oh, I'll just kind of sit here and look at my shoes. Or like, when your parents drag you to church, I guess I'll fold my hands and act like I'm praying now. So I really think that is maybe this is a new thought, but maybe sometimes it's unfair to just kind of invite people to a moment that they're possibly not ready for.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And the more that we've been in this work and awaken, the more I am clear that people should not be mandated to do mindfulness.
Yeah.
Like it is counterproductive in so many ways. So I am appreciating your insight in that. It sometimes when we get hired and the organization that's hiring us is like, nope, this is the way we're going to do it. I'm like, I need the contract. I'm going to do it. And hopefully it's a seed that's planted. But actually, like, I think that it can be like an aggression to people to force
Yeah.
them, especially when we're talking about people that might have trauma. Asking a person who is hyper aroused to get still and notice is not helping,
Yeah.
right? When they don't have any skill set to manage what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it'd be similar to saying, "Hey, we're all gonna, I don't know, do 50 push-ups before we start our meeting today." And we don't know people's health levels. We don't know their competency levels. Did they really come to this meeting to do physical fitness? Mindfulness is definitively, in my mind, mental fitness. It's mental fitness. And so it's good, healthy mental fitness. But I think when you get people who start integrating it into everything, just think about it. I would think about it through that lens. Would you feel safe asking everybody to do 50 push-ups right now just to get our bodies in the right system? It just seems a little, I don't know, there's something there.
Yeah, no, it's real. I guess since we've been touching on Awaken Pittsburgh in this conversation, just to name and probably that's in your introduction too, but
Yeah.
but just to name that you are the president of the board right now. You've been in that role for a little while. Clearly, I'm the executive director, so we have a
Yep.
little bit of a connection there. And
Yep.
and I also feel like it's another way that you are bringing practice into the world. And so I'm just really curious how you were first attracted to Awaken Pittsburgh, and yeah, how does that, if it does, support the rest of you, the work you do in the world or who you
Yeah.
are in the world?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that this world really needs, nobody wants to pay for. And working in social service for 15 years, sometimes speaking of that ER room humor, we used to say we were peeing in the ocean to warm it up. And there's so much poverty, there's so much pain, there's so much suffering. It's easy solution. I mean, it just needs resources. That's all it needs. But we're all kind of scared, barely evolved monkeys, and we hold on to our bananas. And so we really struggle with portioning out those resources in a way that makes um, ethical and moral sense. So then you get the whole industrial complex of nonprofits in America, and their high mission, low functionality, and And so as I pivoted into things that were quite honestly more scaled towards what I wanted to do with my personal family and raising children and trying to run a household, um, it it just moves you away from mission. It just does. There's nobody that can argue against that. And so Awaken was really an opportunity for me to just get involved again and trying to just do good and trying to add some positive influence to this world, for my kids and for future generations. And the mission is, if we could snap our fingers and make our mission true, there's no way the world wouldn't be a better place. I mean, it's just there's no way. So, um, so my work with Awaken really allows me to try to keep some of that social obligation and social consciousness of trying to give back while also balancing the tough realities of raising a family in a capitalist system. So that's that's where I'm at. So yeah,
Yeah, it's real, right? It's real balancing putting your kids through college and having the resources to do that with living your values. It's really hard.
yeah, it really is. And I think that's why most of us move towards this, and the work you do is uh, and the sacrifices you've made to do this work are amazing, admirable. And all of our program implementers and our other board members. But yeah, I mean, that's why we do this. And so I think that it's the best we can do in a system that's not built to win.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you were hoping to share that I didn't ask you about as we're starting to wind down a little bit?
Um, I think maybe I'll just share some things I've stumbled upon as I think about this journey and what's coming up for me in this conversation, and maybe this kind of a cap to this conversation is one of the things I started saying to my clients, my therapy clients and my professional clients, is your brain is not your friend and it can't be trusted. It was kind of this like kitschy thing I said, and it was a pattern interrupt. It was a bit of a koan. And it gets people saying, what does that mean? What does that mean? My brain's not my friend. It can't be trusted. Um, and I also say that we are not thinking creatures who occasionally emote. We are largely emotional creatures who occasionally think. And when you start finding these little things to hold on to, it starts to wake you up, awaken. That's what we're trying to do. And so maybe I'll just challenge the audience to play with that koan. Your brain's not your friend, and it can't be trusted.
I love it. I love it. That's great. Well, the other thing that I always ask everyone on the podcast is to provide a resource or a recommendation for something that could support someone's practice. And you have already given us a couple of great ones. The Zen Mountain Monastery that you said has an online podcast.
Yep,
So
podcast.
they're great. The Untethered Soul, also fantastic to check out. You mentioned John Kabat-Zinn, which he has tons of books and all kinds of video guided practices out there. So anything by him is wonderful. But is there anything else that you were hoping to share as far as a resource?
Yeah, I think one last one, which is really, really important to me, is it's a small local nonprofit, Awaken Pittsburgh. They do great programming. They have a great model. They're very accessible, and everybody's sleeping on that one. So by all means, look up Awaken Pittsburgh.
Awesome, Shawn. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie.
Say Something Studios.